So we've had some discussions about the different systems of the body, and there are a bunch of them, and they're all interconnected with each other. Today we're going to really focus in on the endocrine system, which is what unites them, what allows for communication between different parts of your body. The endocrine system is going to control the body's way of what's called homeostasis, keeping itself regulated, keeping levels at a constant position for really any of the chemicals in your body. You guys remember what homeostasis is, just in general from Bio 101? It's maintaining an internal condition. Your cells maintain homeostasis, and your body as a whole has to as well. And it does that through the production, secretion, and regulation of hormones. We talked about hormones, we didn't. Bio 101, you talked about hormones as chemical messengers. They move through the body and trigger reactions in the cells. They're produced in one area, and then they coordinate a response through the rest of the body. You guys remember what kind of macromolecule hormones usually are? Usually. They are lipids, exactly. The way they function is you got a cell. This is my super awesome picture of a cell with apparently a claw coming out of it. You've got a cell with a receptor on the outside of it. A hormone will come and bind to the receptor, and then that will make a conformational or a shape change on the inside of that receptor that causes it to, it changes shape and release something within the cell. That will then cause a chain reaction to occur inside the cell, and something will occur. Some major change. But these hormones have to get to the cell somehow. They have to get from point A to point B because they're made only in a few different parts of the body. Or even if they were made in the cells, they'd have to move from a cell, say, at your foot, which is not a place that hormones are really normally produced. But let's say they're produced in, your adrenal gland. They have to move from there to, say, your foot. How's that happen? They hitch a ride in the bloodstream. Basically, the bloodstream provides a pathway. It provides a highway to move hormones from one place to another. And we're going to see that a lot with the blood. The blood provides, the bloodstream, the circulatory system, provides a means by which nutrients, gases, and hormones move through the body. So in this image, you can see a secreting cell will release a hormone, it'll get into the bloodstream, follow along, and then diffuse out of the bloodstream to the target cells farther downstream. So there are a bunch of glands that produce hormones. The pituitary gland is located up here. It's really at the base of the brain. I'm not going to ask you, by the way, where are the different glands. I'm just giving you sort of an idea. The thyroid's in the back of the neck. Back? No, sort of right here. The adrenal glands are located on top of the kidneys. You guys pulled out remember dissecting the pig? You ended up pulling out the kidneys, and boom, right behind, right sort of superior to them, you'd see what looked like chewing gum. Because for some reason, the adrenal glands look like really chewed up old gum. You've got the pancreas. The pancreas is going to produce a lot of hormones as well. What hormone do you guys know of that the pancreas produces? Insulin. So we got all these different locations in which hormones are being produced. They're going to jump into the bloodstream, go through the bloodstream, diffuse out, and then interact with target cells. Now, hormones can change cells in different ways. If a cell has more receptors, it will have a larger response than a cell that has fewer receptors. If you have a whole bunch of receptors on you, you're more likely to be able to grab a hormone. Does that make sense? So the more receptors you have, the greater the cell's response. You'll also notice that hormone receptors are very specific. You have some cells that will have a type of receptor and will only be able to accept one type of hormone. Other cells will have a completely different type of receptor. And that's because the cells in your body are specialized at doing certain things. If a hormone might not have an impact in that cell, you don't need a receptor on it. And then some cells are much more universal. They can accept more than one type of hormone. All right, so far so good. Questions? Basically, hormone binds to cell, something happens in the cell. Questions? Okay. Broadly speaking, we have two types of hormone receptors. We have plasma membrane hormone receptors, the kind I've been talking about. They're embedded in the membrane. A hormone binds, and it causes something to happen on the inside of the cell. There's a conformational change, something's released. Or conversely, you could have intracellular hormone receptors. The hormone gets right through the plasma membrane and binds inside the cell. Definition-wise, if a hormone is intracellular, is it soluble or insoluble? Does it dissolve readily or does it not dissolve readily to get through the plasma membrane? So, right, roll the dice. If it's able to get through the plasma membrane, it must be soluble. They'll diffuse directly across. Now that plasma membrane's tricky. Remember, it's got those phospholipids. They've got their hydrophilic head, their hydrophobic tail. So that area is kind of tricky to get through. Soluble hormones that are soluble to the membrane are going to need to generally be pretty darn small. Questions so far? So you got two types. You can bind to the outside of the membrane, or you can bind inside the membrane, and only lipid-soluble hormones can get through that membrane. And then they have to cause some action to occur. There are a few different mechanisms of action. I think there are three mechanisms of action I want you guys to understand. Number one, lipid-soluble ones that act directly inside the cell can bind to DNA in order to stop transcription, or maybe start transcription. Think of it this way. This table is a piece of DNA. And what is DNA made of? What does DNA do in general? What's the point of DNA? Say it again. It's the genetic code. It's got a whole bunch of genes on it that will encode for a certain protein. In order for it to work, you've got to have an RNA polymerase bind to it and read along it. And as it's reading along it, it's going to sort of leave a trail out behind it. That's going to be your mRNA transcript that goes off and gets turned into a, whoa, that smells. It's going to go and get turned into a protein at a ribosome. Central dogma of molecular biology, Bio 101. Now, it has to land, read, and then create that mRNA. If a hormone comes in and lands on top of it, sits on the DNA, it can't read. Does that make sense? That's how it stops it. So it can regulate gene transcription by stopping it. It can also, on the flip side, another type might land on the DNA and recruit this. It makes it easier to bind, at which point it would speed up transcription. Either way, hormones binding to DNA can either speed up or slow down transcription. That's one way they work. Another way, if you bind to the outside of the cell, if you bind onto a G protein in the plasma membrane, that hormone binds and then causes another chemical to be released into the cell. That chemical then starts a cascade. One after the other chemical process begins because that was the go signal. That was the signal that says start. So that might start a biochemical pathway, or it might stop a biochemical pathway. So it can bind directly to the DNA. We could bind to a membrane protein that causes some cascade to happen in the cell. Questions so far? Those are the two big broad ways. I thought there were three, but it looks basically I combined the lipid insoluble and the lipid soluble ones together. Structurally, there are three types of hormones, and they're based on what the hormone is made of. They could be lipid-derived, amino acid-derived, or peptidal. First up, lipid-derived. They are structurally similar to cholesterol, a type of lipid, thus lipid-derived. Basically, you take this lipid, cholesterol, and you begin to make changes to it. Those chemical changes you make are going to turn it into a hormone. So lipid-derived hormones shouldn't come as a surprise that they are derived from, they come from lipids. You could have amino acid-derived hormones. These are very, very small molecules. Think epinephrine, norepinephrine. Basically, you're going to take an amino acid. Check it out, up here, phenylalanine, amino acid. That amino acid is going to go through one enzymatic reaction after another to become tyrosine, to become left dopa, to dopamine, to norepinephrine, to epinephrine. You've taken an amino acid and you've converted it into a hormone. I know, right? Super crazy, this chemistry. It's amazing. And then you have peptidal hormones. These are polypeptide chains. They're proteins. There are some hormones that are proteins, and they get their own category. They've got a distinct form, which gives them their distinct function. Questions or concerns? All right, so we've got the mechanism of action. We've got how they're derived, how we build them. Kind of got their purpose, which is communication. So what triggers them to be released? What triggers this whole reaction? You got, again, three broad ways of triggering hormones to be released. Humoral, hormonal, and neural. So, humoral. This is going to be, hormones will be released in relation to how many ions are present in extracellular fluids. So surrounding the cell, how many ions are there? What type of ions are around? If there are too many ions, that'll trigger some hormone to be released. If there are too few ions, that'll trigger a different hormone to be released. So humoral stimuli is going to deal with the ions outside the cell. Okay? So that's one. Next up, hormonal. This is kind of funny to me. You can trigger a hormone to be released when it's acted on by another hormone. You have these master hormones that will cause a cascade reaction to occur. So, for instance, the hypothalamus might secrete a hormone. That hormone will cause the pituitary gland to secrete a hormone, which then causes the thyroid gland, the adrenal gland, and the gonad to secrete hormones. Basically, it's the one ring of hormones. There's one hormone to control them all. So far we've got humoral, which is extracellular ion levels, hormonal, which is how many hormone, a hormone being released to trigger the effect of another hormone. And then we've got neural. This is the release of hormones as a response to neural stimulation. That is, your brain, your body starts to release hormones based on what you're you don't necessarily mean it to happen, but if you get scared, if you're concerned about something, there are distinct changes to your body caused by hormones being released. I am sure in your lives you have freaked yourself out at some point, and you have felt physiological changes because of that. Whether it's a gnawing in your stomach, shaking, whatever, your brain can trigger hormones to be released that will cause a physiological reaction, and that's neural stimuli. So we got humoral, hormonal, and neural. So far, so good? Sorry, this is the boring lecture. So in the end, we got hormones are chemical messengers. They can move from one place to the other through the bloodstream. They'll bind to either a receptor inside the cell or a receptor outside the cell, but they bind and they cause something to happen. They might bind directly to the DNA, helping it to produce proteins or not, or to slow down protein production. They might lead to a cascade of effects on the inside, signaling a biochemical pathway to begin. They could be derived from lipids, from amino acids, or from proteins. They can change, they could be released based on changes in the extracellular environment, so that's humoral, based on a hormone being released somewhere else, a reaction to another hormone, so hormonal, or based on what you're thinking, neural. Questions or concerns?